What's up, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about whether you should hire a bookkeeper or an accountant for your grant-funded nonprofit. If this is something you've been thinking about, if you know that you need to bring in some additional help, but you're unsure of what that help needs to look like, then keep watching. Okay, so you might hear the term bookkeeper, accountant, and in your mind you're like, well, what's the difference, right? And I get it. A lot of times these titles are often used interchangeably, right? Or some people are using them when they mean the other. One caveat I like to make is it really is less about the title and more about what the roles and responsibilities are going to be from this service provider, or if you're hiring in-house from this particular role. My view is going to come from someone who actually works with nonprofits, and I've worked internally and of course in this outsourced capacity, and I'm going to give you what we see generally from people who hire a bookkeeper versus an accountant. And so first let's talk about the bookkeeper. Typically the bookkeeper is someone who on a monthly basis is recording transactions, they're reconciling your bank accounts, reconciling your credit card transactions, they are typically reviewing and reconciling your individual donation platforms back to the bank. And then there are some who do a bit more where they're paying your bills, your contractors or your vendors, and they're also running your payroll. That is typically where the buck stops with a bookkeeper that comes in to support your nonprofit accounting operations, right? That's the bookkeeper role. The accountant now is typically someone that comes in on an annual basis, and they are normally tasked with filing your 990. Now this is typically split into two different types because you have those organizations that are not yet being audited. Those that are not yet being audited typically will have an accountant come in annually. That person files their 990. Sometimes they perform a review over that bookkeeping that's been done for the year, but typically it's only done to the extent of what they need to file the 990. Then there are those of you who do get audited, right? You have an annual audit. That is a more thorough review, of course, right? You're bringing in the independent CPA, they're auditing your book. So there's a more thorough level of review over that past year. But again, they still only come in annually and they're auditing those books, right? They're making sure things are accurate. They're making sure things make sense and that you actually did what you said you did, right? That the numbers are telling the true story. But even so, they come in annually, they do that audit, they issue an opinion on the state of the financial operations, the integrity of the books, right? And they also file your 990 with those audited numbers. Now those are two general ideas of what the bookkeeper does and what the accountant does. So what does that mean for your organization? Now, the role that you're going to need is going to be one dependent on what stage of growth you're in, right? What's going on with your internal operations? And then also, what does this service provider actually provide, right? What are they actually supporting you with? Typically, when you think about that bookkeeper, their job is more so, let's close the books. They are typically tasked with month-end close, while the CPA that's coming in annually is tasked with taxes. Their focus is taxes. How do I get the 990 filed and do the books? Help me get that filed. However, there are so many things that are happening in between that also need to be managed, right? These are things like the reporting. These are things like grant management, tracking restricted versus unrestricted funding. These are liaising with the different funders, grantors, management, the board, the different stakeholders, right, of the organization. And these a lot of times end up being managed by the executive director, but honestly, in a full-fledged, thriving, fully functioning organization, it would be run by the accounting department. And so what you've probably seen here, there's a theme that we talk about. We don't believe that it should be just the bookkeeper or just the accountant. I'm gonna assume if you're a grant-funded nonprofit, I'm gonna assume at this state, you're at a certain size, right? Typically, at the very least, you're $1 million plus, right? Your budget is $1 million plus, and that you're being audited, then you need more than a single person managing your financial operation. And so we like to say you need to take the team approach, and this can be done, of course, by hiring in-house or outsourcing and making sure they have that set up for you, right? But because the operations are a bit more complex, there's an additional level of internal control and segregation of duties that you are expected to have right now because you're operating at a certain size. That's assuming that you're grant funded, you're $1 million plus, right, and you're being audited. So in that case, I'm going to tell you, I don't think you should just have a bookkeeper or you should just have an accountant. You should be supported by a team of finance or accounting professionals that are responsible for various functions of your fiscal operations. And that could look like, for example, a controller, a senior accountant, and a bookkeeper. Or that could look like a CFO, a senior accountant, and a staff accountant, right? Some of these get the roles that make up the team, right, can vary as long as your organization is getting what it needs. But typically there are multiple things that need to be done, and they don't need to be done by one person, right? Because that's also how fraud and scandals and those types of things end up happening. And so you have to make sure, of course, that the roles are what the organization needs. Now, if you are smaller, so this is for the other set of organizations. If you're smaller, right, then typically you don't need a team, right? If you are under $1 million, 9 times out of 10, you probably don't need a team. And if that's the case, what I'm going to say to you is you need both. You probably weren't expecting that answer. You need both because you still want checks and balances. What I would suggest is that you still have the bookkeeper that's coming in monthly and doing the recording, the reconciling, providing you with, at the very least, the basic financial reports. And then you still have that accountant, that tax accountant, that independent CPA that comes at the end of the year and files your 990 for you, but also does some sort of look back, some sort of oversight over your book, so that you have that checks and balances, so that if there is anything that's red flaggish, right, that at the very least they could flag that for you. Now, I know that's probably wasn't the answer that you were expecting. You probably were expecting me to go with either or. That's just not how I see things, right? That's just not how I see things, especially having done this for some time now. Typically, if you have a sole person, especially depending on the size of the organization, they become overwhelmed. They're usually overworked. It's a lot of moving parts, and it ends up being too much for one person. And so the load needs to be shared, but then the load also needs to be segregated, right? The duties need to be segregated. So the same person that is receiving the money doesn't also need to be recording the money, right? The person that's responsible for all of the initial or basic tasks don't also need to be paying the bills, running payroll. You know, there's a lot of red flags and things that can come up that would be cause for concern because you have this sole person that's responsible for every aspect, right? That is my answer on whether you need a bookkeeper or an accountant for your grant-funded nonprofit. I hope that this was helpful. And honestly, if you have a different take, I'd love to hear it. You know, sound off in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.